Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Muthuraman Annamalai. I'm the section chair for the ASQ Charlotte section. I'm very excited about today's webinar, and I want to thank all of you for taking time off your busy schedule. So in the year 2002, Abels founded C5 Insight, a digital workplace and a people engagement consulting firm, and has consulted with hundreds of companies in a broad range of industries. So his company C5 Insights has been twice named into the Inc. magazine's list of fastest growing companies. So please help me welcome our speaker for this afternoon, Geoff Abels. Geoff.
Thank you so much, Muthuraman, and thank you everybody who's joining us today, wherever you are in the world. I know you're probably concentrated here in the Southeast, but whatever time zone you're joining us from, very much appreciate you carving out a couple minutes of your time. We're going to dive broadly, but not deeply, into the topic of analytics today. So that's a broad range to cover in a short amount of time. So let's dive right in. And I want to start by taking us back to the year 1840. And what could that possibly have to do with modern analytics and predictive modeling, business intelligence, artificial intelligence, and all of that? So in 1840, the Midwest, in fact, most of the country was still just starting the Industrial Revolution. The world was poised on the edge of this transformational period where everything would be different just a few short years down the road. But cities were struggling with that transformation process, because what was happening as the Industrial Revolution was getting underway is that cities couldn't keep up with the growth. People were flocking to cities in greater numbers than ever before for these promising jobs and careers, to have an income and establish a new life that wasn't available to them before. And in the United States, the city of Chicago was way out on the frontier of that organization. In fact, in 1840, the city of Chicago had a population of literally a few hundred people. It was a little podunk frontier town with not much going on. Baltimore, Maryland, by contrast, had this amazing, bright, shining future ahead of it. In this young country, this established city, the second largest city in the country. Chicago is number 98 by 1840 or so. Maryland was number 2. Baltimore, Maryland was number 2. Baltimore was poised to just grow like crazy, integrate a port town, the number 2 city in the country. It was just going to have explosive growth in the future. But Chicago did something disruptive. Chicago was the first city in the 1850s, now a little more established, but still under 10,000 people in the city. Chicago was the first city to decide to make a major investment in a comprehensive sewage system. That's right, toilets and sinks and running water and those kinds of things. Chicago was the first city to say, we're going to invest in this transformative infrastructure to better accommodate these people. Because what was happening in these cities was, not only could cities not keep up with the growth, but there was massive civil unrest because of a lack of this basic infrastructure. Infant mortality rates were very high, sickness was very high, homes that were in disrepair, all sorts of bad parts of the town that just didn't have these things where you could literally smell if you were in a bad part of the town, because they didn't have the right kind of plumbing infrastructure in place. So Chicago decided to make this investment. And it's hard to imagine these days that there's any need to justify this. But at that time, it was not an easy investment to make. A lot of people had to decide that they were going to invest and release this money to make this happen. Well, Chicago's growth shot up like crazy as a result of making that investment. And Baltimore, by contrast, they said, we can't justify this. We've got too much legacy infrastructure sitting on top of things. It'll cost too much to rip this up. We're already big. We're already growing. We just don't need what Chicago is investing in, or for that matter, what almost every successive city invested in. And in 1915, Baltimore was one of the last cities in the United States to install a comprehensive sewage system. By then, Chicago had passed Baltimore in terms of size and growth rate. many years. And in fact, by 1915, they had replaced them as the second largest city in the United States. And they've stayed in that top 3 position ever since, whereas Baltimore's growth has continued to be somewhat flat compared to Chicago. So in other words, when society is transforming, when things are changing fast, if you don't understand what's going on, this can happen, right? In this case, in a very literal sense, this happened. But what's our Chicago today? What's our Baltimore? Technology is changing things faster than ever before. There are disruptive companies. There are companies that are disruptors. What's the difference? What's the plumbing of the 21st century that organizations are going to need to invest in order to become disruptive and not be disrupted like Baltimore, Maryland was? Well, according to this research from IBM, certainly one of those key things to look at is this idea of better analytics. This comes from IBM research, where they interviewed something like 1,200 global CEOs, and they aligned those organizations up to say, what are the fastest growing ones in terms of profit and in terms of overall revenue, and what makes the difference based on these interviews? The fastest growing ones were 108% better at 2 things. Looks like one statistic, but this actually applies to 2 things. 108% better at accessing data, so managing and giving access to data, and 108% better at actually drawing insights out of that data, doing the analytics job. So to get to the analytics job, the data had to be there. They were good at the data, they were good at the analytics, and there's also 84% better at taking those insights and translating those into action. So although only one of those things might be the hands-on analytics piece, all 3 of those things need to be operating in combination with each other. And when IBM looked at this, they said, this is the differentiator. These companies are going fast, they're being very successful, they're great places to work, they're better at these 3 particular things. This is clearly one of the disruptors of the future. Now, I had a great introduction already made, so I'm not going to spend much time on the slide at all, other than to share my contact information with you there. Would love to hear from you. My Twitter handle is there, so if you're on Twitter, reach out. You can also look me up on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. I have a fairly unique first and last name when you put them together. And you can also email me. All the stuff on the left side, you've kind of already heard about me. The stuff on the right side is a little bit more of a personal level of connection with you guys. So my wife and I have become empty nesters recently, and we've raised 2 great daughters who are both recently married, and now we have these 2 great sons-in-law in our family as well. We love spending time with them, and the 2 of us also are really big fans of wine. We like wines of all types, and whenever we can, we stop at different wineries to enjoy it. I even work with some wineries in my line of business, and we also love riding a motorcycle together. We try not to do both of those passions at the same time, but those are a couple of things we really enjoy just as a point of connection. And if you enjoy those things, love to compare notes with you on those as well. In fact, I'd love to connect with you on a ride, particularly if you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, but I actually ride all over the country at different times. So with that background in place, thinking about the IBM research, thinking about Baltimore and Chicago, we took a closer look at this and we said, so if this is so obvious, if this analytics thing is something that's so important to do, why are so many companies falling behind? And it's not that they're not all trying. Based on the companies we've worked with, many companies are trying. Not all of them are actually succeeding at fully implementing and realizing this more analytical type of workplace that they know they need to have to become a company of the future. So as we looked at that and said, so what separates those who succeed from those who struggle? There's really 5 things that came out in this. And it's 5 things that those who succeed take a lot more seriously than those who struggle when it comes to working with data to improve their organization. So let's dive into those 5 habits and talk about what they are and how you can start to implement those within your organization. The first thing that those who succeed do better than those who struggle is they're really serious about acquiring data. Makes a lot of sense, right? But they don't just kind of take some basic data. They don't buy easy to grab data. They actually do a lot of time working with their data to get it into great shape. And the way they do that, the way they look at it is gathering data is really about listening in more places. So when you look at this, you think we've always had this legacy data out there, our old accounting systems with transactions in them. We also have things like file shares and documents and email and those kinds of things. We have service records for our customers in some cases. Then there's these more we'll call them modern sources. They're established, but they're still relatively new, right? So somewhere around the beginning of the 21st century, we saw data starting to come from things like email and mobile experiences, web experiences, external vendors we could buy and overlay data from, voice response systems, those kinds of things. Those are all generating data. And then there's these still evolving data sources, our modern intranets inside of our workplaces to listen to and communicate with each other. All these social platforms, it seems like there's a new one almost every day. Internet of Things data sources, other big data, bots are generating data for us all the time now. So it's very difficult. It can be overwhelming for companies to look at this and say, how do we listen in all these places? And it's a problem. It's actually very difficult to say, how do we listen across all those different channels? Well, we need to, because our customers and our employees want to communicate, and our, by the way, our automations want to communicate across these channels more than ever before. But here's one thing I run into pretty consistently. The best, most predictive data for analytics is actually in those legacy sources, because it's got transaction history in those legacy sources. And what we know from having done this time and time again is the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So a lot of these modern and evolving sources, those are things people are saying and doing and inferring that they might want to do in the future. But legacy transactional data, that's the stuff that's unique to us, that tells us what our customers and prospects and employees actually did with us in the past. That predicts the future better than anything. And what we often see are companies spending a lot of time on these categories more to the right of this image, and they still haven't mastered even their own legacy data, particularly their transactional data, and making that available throughout the organization. So thing one to focus on is get the foundation in place, but then thing two to focus on with listening and acquiring data is now start to listen across all of these different data platforms that are possible for us to listen to out there. Now, I want to share one case study with you that's a more simple one. So when we see all those data sources in our technology age, I think it's tempting to maybe jump into the deep end right away and overcomplicate things. This case study comes from a manufacturer of consumer electronics. It's a name that you would have known. They're kind of a household name. And within their particular organization, they had incredible sales history. They had a lot of great brand recognition, but they also had a lot of pressure being put on manufacturing production of some new products that were rolling off the product line. And unbeknownst to leadership, that pressure was sometimes pushing people across a line of some of the values that the organization wanted to embrace. Not only because of the kind of people they were, but because of the kind of brand that they wanted to have in the organization and project out to the rest of the world. Now, the way this organization typically listened to customers was not untypical relative to most manufacturers. In other words, the people at the top of the organization are pretty far removed from what's going on with the customers who are ultimately using the products that they're bringing to market. And the way that they would listen to those customers is typically they do some kinds of surveying and things like that. They'd have some communication channels through the various different levels of this management hierarchy that you can see here, but it would take a pretty long time for feedback to come in. And again, sometimes bad news doesn't flow up very easily. So they started to look at this and said, how can we do a better job of acquiring better information about what's really going on with our customers? And one of the things they did was to implement a social listening program to say, how do we listen to what's going on social networks? What are people saying about our products? And one of the things they started to identify with sentiment was, we're seeing an increase in some negative sentiment here externally, but also internally. So they had a social listening platform that was internally focused too. This wasn't just customer engagement focused, it was also employee engagement focused. And as they looked at that social information, they said, our employees are starting to trend a little bit more negatively in their sentiment and their conversations they're having on our internal social platforms. So they took a closer look at that just by asking questions. So one of the things that they embraced as they looked at this was, we want to listen to people at a thematic level, but we don't want to violate privacy. You've probably all engaged in employee engagement types of surveys, usually once every year or two. Most organizations will have some kind of survey they send to their employees. They'll ask for feedback. And the promise is that this will be anonymous, but they will roll it up to various levels so they can understand the trends by different teams and managers and departments and that kind of thing. So they approached this the same way. They kind of found where in the company this was trending negative. And without looking too closely at the individuals, then they just started having conversations via social. Some of these were private, some of these were in person, one-on-one. But one of the things they found was there was a massive compromise going on around product quality because of all this pressure on production and productivity being pushed from the top down to the bottom of the organization. And it would have eventually resulted in a very massive crisis had many of these products actually reached their end consumers that they were targeting. So a very simple, basic way that these guys were able to do better analytics without investing in huge data consumption things, but actually by looking at what was going on just in social conversations within their own four walls. Of course, there are more complex ways to do that. We're going to talk about it, but I like to start simple and say there's some things we can do at a low investment level to start listening better and working with our data better. Now, as you might have inferred from the Microsoft analytics that we saw earlier, the IBM analytics that we saw earlier, is that the ability to now take all this data that we've gathered and analyze it is the next thing that the successful do better than those who struggle. They spend a lot of time and money focusing on getting this data ready for analysis and actually analyzing it. And when it comes to getting data ready for analysis, here's one thing that you probably already know about. The amount of data available to us to analyze as business people is growing exponentially year over year. In fact, soon it'll be time to update this infographic, but you can kind of see where we were just in 2006, 12 years ago, versus where we were just a couple of years ago. There was this massive growth in the zettabytes of data available to us. And that massive growth trend is continuing. And that kind of gave birth to this whole idea of big data. We've got all this data, what are we going to do with it? So you're probably familiar with that statistic. The statistic you may not be available with is how much of that data is actually bad data. That acronym at the bottom, RODI, is something that we've seen some generic versions of. We've kind of created our own version of it, but it means data that's redundant, outdated, trivial, inaccurate, or incomplete. So ROTII. And when you look at research from various different groups, the projection is that somewhere between 53% and 80% of the data in our information systems is RODI. So here's what that means. Within 2 years of now, the amount of data you have in your information systems is going to be approximately double what it is today. But almost 100% of that growth, or maybe more, will have also become bad data. So bad data is actually growing even faster than good data is. So companies that take analytics seriously don't just take the acquisition of data seriously. They take this idea of how do we keep it as clean as possible really seriously as well. Really important part of it. So one thing I'd like for you to take away from this is, how do you keep your data clean? And that goes to things like governance strategies, training, getting everybody to own the cleanliness of data. One of the things we're seeing people start to emerge as is data stewards within organizations. When you think about it, you're building a digital workplace, right? In your physical workplace, you have people who come in and keep that workplace neat and organized every day, right? They empty the trash, they clean the bathrooms, they vacuum the floors. They're the stewards of your workplace. Well, in your digital workplace, you need data stewards who take care of that too. So the people who need to get their job done day in, day out can actually do it without having big messes that they have to wade through. This is a part of cleaning up your RODI. So think about, who is our data steward? Is that something we subcontract like we do in our physical workplace? Or is that something we handle ourselves? Now, here's some of the results of all that bad data. From Harvard Business Review, people spend almost 20% of their time, I think 19% is the actual statistic, looking for data that they need to get their job done. So that means of your human capital investment as an organization, 20% of that capital investment into human beings goes into looking for data. Why do they spend so much time looking for data? Because they're listening in so many places, and they got to search all those places. They should listen in as many as they can, but as an organization, you should remember in fewer. Give people fewer places to go to find what they need, but also keep it clean. Make it easier to find the right data, the right document, the right customer record, the right analytics report, whatever it is that they need. And there's some math there at the bottom of the page too. If you got a 1,000-person organization, you might be spending $10 million a year on people finding stuff. in order to get their jobs done, in order to do the analysis that they need to do to write that proposal, make that recommendation, make a better decision about quality, whatever it is. There's this massive investment there. Keeping data clean is an important part of it. And making the data easy to search is also a part of it. So that speaks to fewer places where people have to go to look for their data and logical ways to search for things so that people can quickly find what they need to get their jobs done. Now, also, when we talk about how do people analyze their data, this upside down pyramid, think of this as data consumers. These are the people who need to consume different types of analytics, different types of data within your organization, right? So let's go through that pyramid from top to bottom, and let's look at it in terms of the type of data that they need. So your front lines people, the people who are talking to customers each day, they need what we would call little data, right? We forget about little data when we get excited about big data, but the front lines people are, and sorry, I might have to switch my headset here. I'm getting a low battery warning. The front lines people have to create little data and they have to use little data to get their jobs done. Little data is one record at a time, one document at a time, but knowing what I need to know about that thing at the point of decision very rapidly to get my job done and making it easy for me to contribute good quality little data so that others can do their job better. Managers need medium data. That tends to be the data that managers need to make better decisions about running their team. So it tends to be a summary of the data created by the people below them in the organization, but sometimes it needs to also marry together with data from other departments within the organization. And executive and analysts, they're the ones who really need big data day in and day out to do their jobs well. Now, they do need two very different flavors of big data. Analysts need highly summarized big data so that they can make decisions. They're the ones who are going to use tools like business intelligence tools and reporting tools and stuff like that to look at big data. Analysts need big data, but they need it in a very granular format so that they can actually dive deep into the causality behind some of the trends that executives might see in big data and even find some of the smaller sub-trends that might not be apparent by looking at the top level of data. They're the ones who are going to crunch the numbers, do more analysis, present more things to executives, maybe even put models and artificial intelligence tools in place to help suss out more insights to feed back to the rest of the team. So you need to think about your strategy for how do I make analytics available to all of these groups, not just to one or two data stakeholders in the organization. And as you think about what the different types of analysis are, here's three very broad ways to think about and categorize analyzing your data. If you think about your data as a driving experience, descriptive data is your rear view mirror. That's the stuff you've been using for years. That's in your business intelligence reporting tools. It might be more, it might have more sizzle and be more glamorous than it was 10 or 15 years ago, but it's really still just descriptive. It's looking at reports and insights based on what's happened in the past so that you can try to make better decisions about the future. The second category is what we call predictive. That's looking out your front window as you're driving your car. That's saying we're going to predict the future, but it's usually based on what's actually happened in the past. So it takes that descriptive historical data, maybe it takes some other more real-time data, and it says, here's what I think is going to happen in the future. So an example of that would be a score. So if you are in sales, someone might score your leads for you to say, here's the ones that are most likely to buy something from us based on what they've done in the past, or here's the next product someone may buy based on what they've done in the past, or here's a risk report if you're in banking to say, here's who's likely to default on their loans or whatever it's going to be. So predictive is basically saying, I'm going to predict what is going to happen in the future. Either this machine might fail, this person might buy, whatever it is, based on what's happened in the past. And then the third category, which is the more emerging category right now, is prescriptive analytics. And that's like your GPS in your car, right? So it's building on top of predictive, and it's saying, look, based on all of that, I think this is what you should actually do in the future. So it's going beyond just saying, here's what I think this person's going to do, you make a decision what to do about it, to actually recommending some kind of action to you. So that can be anything like maybe an Internet of Things device triggering something saying, it looks like a part of this expensive piece of machinery is going to fail soon. Not only am I predicting it's going to fail soon, but I'm adding an activity to a field service person's task list to say, go replace that part proactively so that this customer experiences less downtime, as one potential example of how predictive works. So descriptive rear view, great, except you don't want to drive your car looking out the rear view. Predictive, the front window, driving into the future, and prescriptive, telling you where to actually turn. I'm going to skip past this slide because I'm running a little low on time, but this is out of a report we put together a few years ago where we talked about some of the great tools available for data and analysis. And the one thing I wanted to point out on this is we get really hung up on, oh my gosh, what kind of analytics tool should we buy? The number one most popular analytics tool, and it still has a ton of value for all sorts of analytics, is Microsoft Excel. So starting with that and then using tools that build on top of that is a great.
So as I was pointing out, 466% of marketers point out that when they use process, they report success more often than those who don't. But if you look deeper into that statistic, only 13% of marketers actually use process. So there's huge potential for improving business processes. The other couple of things I would point out about these metrics are, if you look closely at them, all 4 of these metrics are related to engaging customers and employees. And one of the things we've come to realize over time is businesses have actually extracted a lot of the value around what I would call operational process improvement already. Can they continue to do so? Yes. And with AI and robotics and the Internet of Things, there will still continue to be some potential there for improving this. But overall, what businesses are starting to realize is they've actually achieved much of the improvement that they can in that arena, and they're starting to shift their focus to these more qualitative, softer process areas where they say it has to do with people and it has to do with relationships, and how do we measure those and improve those things that aren't quite as rigid of a process as legacy operational types of processes. So something to think about as you embrace process with what you're doing with your analytics. Now, when you think about process overall, the other thing you need to remember with analytics is not only are you impacting business processes, you need to have your own process for embracing analytics as well. And we're really kind of walking through that with the 5 things that I'm going through now. But let me give you a really high-level recap using slightly different vernacular. You have to be very good at the information side, not only putting the information together, but getting it clean and formatted. In fact, over 50% of the time spent on analytics in most organizations is not actually spent on analytics. It's spent on preparing data to be analyzed. So you need the right kind of data and the right kind of people to prepare that data in order to actually do the analytics. Then there's the raw analytics. That might be the domain of the data scientist, someone who can really suss out special information from the analytics. And that might be accompanied by some artificial intelligence. But oftentimes it's another role to say, now that I've got the raw analytics, I need to actually interpret that analytics. I need to create recommendations and decisions and things we need to do differently based on the analytics we're finding out there. Then there's the idea of never stopping to improve, right? You don't do it once and make a change and move on to the next challenge, but you put an ongoing process in place to keep that going. And then finally, you want to embrace analytics as a cultural norm within your organization. So it's just something everybody embraces. It's not the job of 1 or 2 people to be analytical. It's actually the job of the entire company to become more analytical with respect to what their own job description is. And I've actually seen this work everywhere from ice cream parlors with high levels of turnover with very young employees who might be in college, to manufacturers where they have very operational machine floor people participating in this, to banking where those people tend to be a little more familiar with analytics already. So it is possible. You need to take it seriously and give everybody a voice in making improvements, which we'll talk about in a moment. So as you think about an overall analytics process, remember a lot of this is going to impact people. And so you need to have this idea of our analytical processes have to be flexible. We call it having tires, right? Because most of our historical corporate processes, especially things related to things like quality management and operations, tend to be pretty rigid. They're not made to be changed super fast, super dynamically. You discover what needs to be done, and it stays on a pretty rigid set of tracks. But when we're talking about continuous improvement with analytics, you have to have flexibility. So unlike train tracks, and unlike the Wild West where there's no paved roads at all, in this case, think of it as navigating a system of paved roads. People have to have the flexibility to quickly turn, when they need to. But you also need to have enough rigidity, like rims in the center of a tire, to have some stability in what you're doing. And RIMS is an acronym meaning your processes need to be repeatable, improvable, measurable, and scalable. So enough flexibility that you can learn, right? And when you look at ecosystems, when you look at learning systems, most of the learning happens out on the edges where people are taking risks, they're trying new things, they've got some flexibility, and then those learnings become part of the rigid core as the system evolves together. You've got to have that flexibility, but if you have no rims, you have no process in place already, no core, no sturdy core that you can learn from and apply processes to. So you need a framework in place that you can learn lessons from and then add those to the core so you can get smarter as you grow as a team. The fourth area that you need to focus on, that the successful focus on, is this idea of constant assessment, assessing and improving what's going on in their processes. So they don't just kind of give people tools and say, go use them. They actually say, let's constantly look at this together so everybody on the team knows what the score is. We share the score with the team, and we give every single person a voice in improving the score together. That's the idea of assessing and constantly improving. It's not something that a few people do. It's something that everybody in an organization is given an opportunity to participate in by becoming a more collaborative, knowledge-sharing type of organization. This information from Deloitte gives great evidence to, if you can create that kind of organizational way of thinking and doing things, the benefits are astronomical. You can really reinvent, transform, become a disruptive organization by doing that. So what stands in the way of doing that? Well, when the authors of Boundary Spanning Leadership interviewed business leaders, 86% of those business leaders said collaboration, particularly across departments, is absolutely critical to our success as an organization. And when they asked those same leaders, well, are you good at it? Only 7% of them reported that they are good enough at that level of collaboration, a huge 79% gap between how important this is and how well people do it. This idea of assessment, we've come to call the collaboration principle, because although it sounds numeric, it sounds like sharing the score and all that stuff, all that's good. The hard part is actually learning how to collaborate together better as a team so that you let everyone know what the score is, which in and of itself can be difficult. In fact, over 90% of managers report that they don't have the metrics they need to really measure how the individuals on their team are performing. So you've got to know that score, that's a challenge, but then somehow you've got to bring the team together to collaborate on improving the score. So here's a couple of thoughts on how to do that. First of all, you've probably heard of BHAGs. That's called a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's been around for a while. The BHAG, the most famous BHAG of all, was when John F. Kennedy said, we need to put a man on the moon and bring him back home safely by the end of this century. And a lot of people said, wow, I think that's probably impossible. I don't know if we can do it. And yet the resources came together and the people collaborated to ultimately pull that goal off and make it happen. That's a BHAG. The problem with BHAGs in today's world is we have a shorter and shorter attention span. We have higher levels of turnover among our staff, and it's really hard to keep people focused on a goal over a long period of time. In fact, attention spans have declined by over 50%, I believe, in the past 10 years, from about 12 seconds to about 8 seconds. So it's amazing that you're still on this webinar and listening. The idea is the human brain needs some new stimuli every 8 seconds in order to stay engaged and continue to move forward towards goals. So what is a SQAG? A SQAG is a term that we came up with that we found is working really well, and it means a small, quickly attainable goal. It's something that an individual can do and have 100% control over. The problem with a BHAG is it tends to be a team goal. You tend to not even know if you've done it until it's too late, right? So our BHAG is to do this by the end of this year. Well, if we don't make it to that by the end of the year, it's too late to do anything about it, and I got to focus on it for a whole year before I can get to it. Whereas a SQAG is something that it's an individual goal, and I have 100% control over achieving that goal. So let me give you an example. For me, a BHAG might be, I need to lose 30 pounds, right? That's a real BHAG for me. It's going to take me a long time to get there. A SQAG for me is, I need to get my heart rate up for 20, 25 minutes every single day. I have 100% control over making that SQAG happen today. I can have a victory on that today, right now. So think about the individuals in your organization. If every one of them can have a SQAG, and that SQAG can change, in fact, it can and should change quarterly, semi-annually, annually, to say, here's the things we think will help you contribute to our overall BHAG, but you can control it every single day, and you can measure it for yourself and constantly improve on it. And the idea behind that is you focus on it for a while, you understand what your current performance level is, you focus on it for a while, then you move on to another one. And when you move on, you don't go back to where you were before. You may drop from your peak, but you've raised your performance to a new plateau. And you're gradually moving through these squags to gradually improve the actual productivity and performance of people over a long period of time. We've seen this work again and again in so many situations. It's not always easy to do, and it requires a lot of participation, but it gives everybody visibility into what their real score is, and it gives them a voice into saying, how can I actually improve this? Or even, is this the right thing to be measuring? Is there something else that would help us to contribute to the bottom line of the company better? Another way that organizations that do this well are embracing this is they're becoming what's called a fail-safe organization. Remember when I talked about rigid at the core and flexible at the edges? The idea around becoming fail-safe is at those flexible edges, people need to have the freedom to be able to talk about their failures. I don't mean they should take failure lightly. We see this mistake pretty often too. Failure should be taken very seriously, but at the same time, if you can't have a kill the messenger culture. You have to have a culture that embraces this. So if you overlap this with the squags that I talked about a moment ago, if you have a team who's all focusing on one squag together, let's say that squag is customer satisfaction after repairs are done or something like that. So you can affect that on a day-to-day basis. So if that's the squag that they're facing on, they can talk about failure together. I can come together and say, wow, my squag score is way lower than I wish it were for this week, but here's this other person who has a really high score. Let me talk to that more experienced, seasoned person and let them peer mentor me. Instead of my boss just telling me I need to get my score up, this peer who I respect will tell me, here's what's working for me, maybe you should try that. So creating roundtables where it's safe to talk about failure, it's safe to share the numbers, it's safe to learn and grow together. If you can't share failure, you're not going to learn and grow, because at the end of the day, analytics is really all about measuring where we're less than perfect and closing the gap between the present and the perfect constantly. So you've got to be open to looking at failure, whatever you call that, on an ongoing basis, creating this lion's den where people know I'm not happy to go in there, but I know there's something bigger than me that's got my back when I go in there, and we're going to learn and grow and walk out of this thing together. And the fifth thing, and you'll notice we all go with the theme of an A, is this idea of alignment. It's the culture thing. It's this idea of we've got to become a company that embraces this idea of analytics together. In fact, if you go through all four of those things I talked about, you'll hear this constant theme of it's not just what we do, it's who we are. And that's what culture is. Culture is who you are as a company, the kind of people you fire, the kind of people you retain, the kind of people you hire. All of those things come together, and then what you do from bottom up and top down within that culture is absolutely going to define your success with embracing analytics. And I have a lot of people look at this and go, well, that's great. That's a job for management. My experience is that no, it's not. Yes, management can play a significant role in defining culture. What I've seen again and again is culture is not defined by a person or a team of people at the top of the organization. Culture is defined by every single person in the organization. And when you want change to happen, that kind of change rarely happens from the top down. The top down may want it, but people are actually more impacted by their peers in the business than they are by their managers in the business. That is a statistical fact. So everyone has power to impact their peers to change their culture into a culture that's more analytical, that embraces failure, that does many of the things we talked about. And one of the ways we've really found is helpful is look up the videos from Simon Sinek. He talks a lot about this idea of starting with why. That's your culture. Why are we doing this? Why really in our gut are we doing it? Not what do we do, not how do we do it, but what is our reason for even existing? And how do we connect analytics to that? If you actually define a reason for existing, and here's a hint, every one of them has to do with people, the people that you exist to serve outside of your company and the people that you exist to serve inside of your company. If you can define that why and you can attach your reason for analytics to that why, you're going to create a stronger culture of analytics within your organization. We run whole exercises on helping people to define and make those connections. So acquire, analyze, act, assess, and align. Here's a great snapshot of everything we just talked about with some of the high-level talking points for each one of those that you need to embrace if you're going to do analytics well within your organization. It's not just a matter of buying the tools and hiring the people. It's actually a matter of being serious about the data, being serious about, yes, the tools and the methods, being serious about the implementation of that, taking action, assessing that constantly, never discontinuing, improving, and having a culture that aligns everybody around this idea of the customer, the employee, and how we analyze them together. We like to make it really simple. And so another way of thinking about these 5 principles is this: listening to people, right? When you listen, you're gathering data, that's forming your database, understanding them, doing the analytics, connecting the processes that actually create better connections, knowing and improving the results constantly. And then that spells luck. Listen, understand, connect, and know. Good luck is this idea of going beyond what we do to actually saying, who are we? What's the culture? What's the purpose that we do all of these things for? So when we help companies do this, we say companies are doing this well are companies that have learned to become powered by luck. So if you want one simple takeaway slide from today, this is a great recap of everything we talked about. And if you always come back to these 5 things and say, hey, in my analytics project, how am I working to improve each of these 5 areas? You will ultimately get to success. So thank you. I'll have one more closing slide after this and we'll throw it open to questions. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for your patience with my audio difficulties that I had before. And one thing I want to point out to you guys is at the end of the day, you guys are at this transformational time in history yourselves. You're where Chicago and Baltimore were in the early to mid 1800s. And one of the things you're doing is you are going to be the shoulders that people stand on. So I know in the day-to-day weeds, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that, but you are creating these transformational organizations by embracing analytics and embracing the things you do. They're actually paving the way for the next generation to live in these shining cities. These companies are actually doing things better and better. One of the things to keep track of as you do all this is it's not just all for profit. It is for people. And that's the cultural thing. When we see organizations embrace that and embrace it well, we see organizations full of highly motivated people who say, yeah, we want to have a great pulse, but the reason we have a pulse is because we exist to serve people. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for your interest in this. Thank you for existing to serve people. Keep your eye on that ball and you're going to have success. Here's some quick other resources for you. If you'd like to get the infographics and even more detail with references that we shared today, you can hit that link and send us your email address. We'll send you a copy of those. If you want to dive deeper with the luck principle, you can buy the book on Amazon. There's a link to it. And if you want to engage deeper on this and bring someone in to run a workshop or to help you set up a culture of analytics, that's what we exist to do. We'd, of course, be delighted to do that for you as well. I'll leave it there and just throw it open to questions.
Okay, Geoff, thank you very much for the presentation. There was a question that was asked. Mike Olian, he is asking, great job, Geoff, very informative and helpful. Keep up the great work as a thought leader in the digital ecosystem. It's not a question, but I think a positive feedback or comment to you.
Thank you. I love the positive feedback. Believe me, you can't imagine how helpful that is, especially on a webinar where you're not sure how people respond to it. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And please reach out and connect to me. There's some of my connection information. If you'd like to stay connected, then I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, there's somebody else who's typing up a question. This is Michael Kingsley. Yeah, I'm waiting for the question to come in. I believe he's typing it, but I don't know if we can open it up. Okay. So this was a question from Regina Kusar. So great presentation, even with sound issues. Can we receive the slides? Will the PDF copy of the slides be available for the attendees, Geoff?
So I know ASQ is going to publish the slides on YouTube afterwards, so as a video, so you'll have that to refer to. I'm sure you'll be getting a link to that. If you will email me with the address below, I will send you a PDF. We don't share our slides in their full PowerPoint format because that's part of our intellectual property, but we'll be glad to share.
Okay. So yeah, Regina, please yeah, email Geoff. Yeah, Geoff. You know, the email address is there. Geoff Abels at C5 Insight. Okay. Anybody else has any other questions you want to ask Geoff right now? You can either use the chat window or use the Q&A. Yeah. Okay. So Regina was saying the YouTube link will work fine. Okay. Anybody else? Michael, I don't know if you're typing up the question, so please provide it so we can ask Geoff that question. So Geoff, I had a question. So if you were to come into an organization and to I don't know, to have that culture of analytics, right? How long will it take, or like a mid-sized company, how much time would it take to change the culture?
So thank you for asking. Great question, and not an easy question to answer. It really depends on where you are, what your culture already is. Okay. Cultural change, in our view, is generally a somewhat long-term proposition, and sometimes we're along for that entire ride. Sometimes we help to just give a push in the right direction. But here's the guidelines I'd give around it, rather than trying to put specific timetables to it. It is, I think it was the European Journal of Human Psychology defined, number one, that humans can only tackle about 2 to 3 goals at a time. And if you start adding more goals to that, you actually achieve fewer things. So, and analytics is a many-faceted thing. So you're not really trying to give people a goal around becoming analytical. You're kind of easing them through a lot of different transformations throughout that process. So you need to document those as milestones. The other thing the organization found is the old way of thinking was in 30 days you can create a new habit, right? So get people to do something consistent for 30 days and now they own it. But that organization found that the average is somewhere between 18 and I think 257 days. I might not have that high end quite right, but it's pretty long. And the average is about 66 days to learn a new habit. So as you think about this, you need to go slow. You need to have a finite number of goals, and you need to make sure you've given your team the time not to just do something a few times, but to do it repetitively enough so that it's absolutely institutionalized. So just looking at that alone, you know that you're in for at least a year, and that's probably in a great situation to transform an organization's thinking. It might be 2, 3, or 5 years or something like that. So it needs to run in parallel with a lot of other things that are going on in the organization.
Okay, thank you for those time duration, all that. So there's another question, Geoff. This is from Hani Naba. So he's mentioning that it's a great presentation, and he wants to find out what software is used to present or provide this presentation. Are you using some kind of software to create these slides, or is it just Microsoft PowerPoint, or is this something else?
No magic at all. It's just Microsoft PowerPoint, and then some of the images want to come from different places. So if you want just the basics of it is, what I do for my slides is every single slide I have a photo in the background, and you can just go to an image on Google or Bing and search for photos that kind of have the topic matter that you like. And then I shade those with a dark foreground so that my letters show up well, and that's it.
Okay, all right. Thank you for sharing that tip, Geoff. If others don't have any more questions, we can adjourn our webinar today. I want to thank all of you for taking time of your busy schedule and attending the webinar. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm here for questions if you want to email. Bye-bye.